Welcome everyone. Happy Thursday. It's great to see you all. We're still admitting people from the waiting room at the moment. And while we do that, um, I am happy to introduce or reintroduce myself. I'm Rabbi Max Chaiken. Welcome with Congregation Kol Ami. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces, and I'm so glad to see all of you here with us this afternoon, or perhaps late afternoon if you're calling in from other parts of the country. I know we have some folks on the East Coast. I know we've got some folks here, of course, in Southern California. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute, but because this is a little bit different maybe than some of the other Zoom programming that you are accustomed to, a few technical notes. At the moment, you are muted and you are not currently able to unmute yourselves. We are going to, once we start, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourselves if there are questions that come up, because I don't expect you'll be able to use the chat too easily necessarily once you're measuring ingredients and all these things. But you can, our student rabbi, Ilana Rabishaw, is here. You can use the chat, of course, if you're able. And otherwise, you can try to, if you do have a question, ask verbally. If you didn't see the link to the recipe we provided, here it is again. And that recipe is one that admittedly I have been working on through some trial and error throughout this pandemic of this last year. It is sort of a conglomeration of a few different recipes that I've been curating as I have cooked through the quarantine. And so we also will have a little bit of a chance to learn together, of course, both in this hour and at 4:30 after our doughs rise, if you're cooking along today. So the first thing we need to do right now, and I will adjust the setting there as that people will be able to unmute if they have a question, if you all have a question. The first thing you're going to want to do is start to get your yeast to start blooming. So I'm going to put my water, here, it's Torah Challah cam. I'm going to put my water into the microwave, let it warm up before I add the yeast and the couple tablespoons of sugar to the yeast mixture there. And once we get our yeast starting to bloom, you're going to want to let that sit about 10 minutes. That's going to be a great time to start measuring out your other ingredients, your oil, your sugar, start cracking your eggs, all that good stuff. And in the meantime, we also, part of what I wanted to think about this hour while we're starting to put our dough together is about recipes themselves and what a recipe offers us as a text in and of itself. Sometimes when we are, people are still joining the room here. I see that. It's amazing. Welcome. If you're just joining us, welcome. Recipes themselves are in many ways a text or a time capsule. They can really teach us a lot. And I wanted to share a short passage. I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. So this is a text sheet that I put together. We'll drop the link in the chat as well so you can take it home, so to speak, with you. But this first text, hold on, let's get our yeast proofing together. So actually, let's stop the screen share. So you'll see also here that if you're in speaker view, it'll be the best way to participate, so you can see both me and you can see my Challah cam here. We've got that set up special. But right now, I've got my water. I've warmed it up. I use a thermometer to see how warm the water is, because you don't want your water to be too hot. You'll burn your yeast. Yeast is a living kind of ingredient in that way. But you don't want it to be too cool, because it needs some warmth to properly blossom and to help your challah rise well. So my microwave I know is finicky, and I like to try to get between 110 and 115 degrees. That's what the recipe says there, I think. If I remember correctly, what I wrote down. Always a trick in these days. I'm just about there. That should do here with this water. So I let my yeast proof in my mixer here. And I'll add my 2 packets of yeast over here as well. And then I'll add those 2 tablespoons of sugar.
Rabbi Chaiken, do you know what that translates to in teaspoons if somebody's using?
Yes, so each packet of yeast is 2¼ teaspoons. Each packet of yeast is 2¼ teaspoons. So I believe that's to 4½. I think the recipe says so there, I believe, but we'll do that there. And we'll then get 2 tablespoons of sugar into there as well. The sugar is really what the yeast is eating, is my understanding. The yeast, being a bacteria, loves to have the sugar, and that's helping it blossom. And so in about 10 minutes, your yeast should be nice and fluffy, nice and lots of sort of bubbly and fluffy there.
Hey, and Rabbi Max.
Yeah. Hi, David.
It's David. I have a question because I have 2 types of yeast. I don't know which to use.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, I use active dry yeast. If that's what you have, that's what I recommend.
Well, one's labeled quick rise, and one doesn't say that.
I would use the one that is not labeled quick rise then. Let me see them both. There, David.
This is probably the one to use.
That's
the one. Active dry. That's the one.
And then this was the quick rise.
Yeah, I would say the other one is the active dry is what I'm using. My recipe uses 2 packets. Yep. Mm-hmm.
2. The interesting thing I noticed is that they're both made by the same company.
Yeah. Well, there's only so many companies actually making yeast. It's really interesting. Earlier in the pandemic, you might, if you were like me, recognizing that you had some time on your hands, you might have tried to go and find yeast in the store only to realize that they were sold out early on. About a year ago, there was a run on yeast, I guess, as just along with the toilet paper and all the other things people started to hoard in there at home. So, but while our yeasts are proofing, I wanted to share this text. This is a passage from a blog piece that talks about recipes. It's written by Melissa Frey, the former director of the URJ Quds Camp. And she writes that during times of chaos and uncertainty, it's often the people and places and comforting things from earlier parts of our lives that bring us a sense of clarity and calm. For me, the pinnacle experience is Jewish summer camp, and one of the fondest memories was of the beautifully braided challah, ritual bread. We would consume it every Friday evening, lovingly baked by the camp chef. While the recipe changed and evolved and seemed to be lost over the years, it is the challah that represents the impact of the totality of the experience. Now, for many years, they searched for the camp recipe, and in 2019, in the process of going through the camp's archives, because the camp was closing, I came across a tattered piece of paper, Melissa writes, and suddenly I felt a spark of hope. As I prepared the dough in my friend Lisa's kitchen and started to bake, Lisa documented the moment with the following musings. While Melissa was going through the contents of the attic of the Quds camp before its demise, she chanced upon a tattered piece of paper typewritten with a suspicious list of ingredients. The paper is oil-stained, partially illegible, but clearly the bones of a challah recipe. It has long been assumed that our renowned chef of the early days of Quds took his incredible challah recipe with him to the grave. But while most of us have dug into a variety of interesting COVID-19 projects, Melissa collected every online Jewish cookbook from the 60s and 70s, found dozens of challah recipes from that era, and hopefully put the pieces of the puzzle back together again. Now, this is not that recipe. This is my recipe, as I said, that I have been cultivating. But the way that she speaks about that tattered piece of paper and the way a recipe itself can represent a connection to memory, to the past, to our ancestors, it really spoke to me. And so I offer that to you as well. And I wonder, part of my search in this process was that I didn't have a family challah recipe. My family that wasn't something that was really part of our family tradition in that way, to bake our own. I've got, my grandmother, Zichronah livracha, may her memory be a blessing. She had a lot of family recipes, none of them kosher, not a single one, because she grew up in Savannah, Georgia. In fact, her famous chopped liver, the secret recipe was that she soaked the livers in milk. I kid you not. She soaked the livers in milk because it got rid of the livery taste and it created a delicious pate chopped liver style. I mean, this later on when I learned that that was a secret to Grandma's chopped liver, we laughed. It was a great joy. In any case, so your yeast is ready to proof. You should be measuring out some of the rest of your ingredients, your oil, your honey. Now this recipe, I use honey all year long. I think challah is delicious, especially when it's sweet. Here in my challah cam, I'm also going to crack my eggs now into my oil and my honey. And I'm going to crack 4 eggs there as well to get them ready. So yeah, for me, challah is really best when it's sweet, and my husband agrees with that too. So I certainly have been using a pretty sweet recipe. One of the fascinating things about challah is that if you go online and start searching for recipes, you're going to find dozens and dozens, and there really can be significant differences in the proportions and the ratios. It's very interesting to me that challah became sweeter. Actually, I learned it became sweeter in the United States when Jewish immigrants in the early 20th century suddenly had more access to things like sugar and eggs, right? To make their challah, to enrich the dough more. Challah wasn't always so sweet. In fact, Eastern European traditional Ashkenazi challahs are quite savory loaves in some recipes. So I'm gonna give those a bit of a mix before they go into the mixer in a couple moments. I've already measured out here my sugar and salt. It's gonna go in there into the mixer in a few minutes. If you're not using a stand mixer, that's okay. You can certainly do this all either by hand or with a hand mixer for the first part, and then you can knead entirely by hand. I do knead my dough a little bit first with the mixing attachment here on my mixer because it just is a little easier. It's just a bit easier way to do it. And of course, some of you may have noticed I'm also wearing my dapper Kol Ami apron here today, courtesy of our Iron Maccabee Chef competition from Hanukkah. If you were with us then, we had a really good time. So a couple more minutes. I'm going to bring our challah cam over actually to my mixer. There we go. Let's unplug that. So you can see there, and can we highlight the challah cam there, Rabbi Shaw, if you don't mind?
I'm not sure I have access to do that.
No, are you not?
Oh wait, just kidding. I lied.
Okay. So you can see it's a little bright actually. The sun just came out on that window, but you can see that my yeast mixture is pretty fluffy. Let's see if we can get even better angle there.
Is there smell-o-vision, Rabbi Chaiken, to let us know what?
I wish. Oh, I wish. It smells yeasty. It smells bready, and you can see it's bubbly, and it is. That's a better angle. And it's pretty fluffy, ready to, just about ready for me to add the other ingredients and start mixing them all together. So let's leave that there. Okay. Before I do that, let's pause for a moment. Are there questions, comments, anything we can? You lost the challah cam?
We switched it to the blender cam. It's blender cam right now.
That's okay. Now it's blender cam. That's right. So, okay. So if you've measured out your wet ingredients, your eggs, your oil, your honey, and you've got your sugar and this is the sugar and the salt as well. You can add those all to your yeast mixture. And if you put it all together in a bowl, make sure to scrape out that honey because it can get sticky there, and you want to get the full measure if you can.
If you're about 30 seconds behind Rabbi Chaiken, I highly recommend using like Pam spray on any sticky bowl, whether it's for the honey or for even the eggs sometimes, because that way I get everything out of the bowl and into the blender.
Oh, see, that's a great idea, Rabbi, and I didn't even think of that myself. That's one of the cool things that I've been learning also is you learn tips and tricks as you go and you keep working on it. If you haven't started measuring yet your flour, when you start measuring your flour, make sure to scrape off the top of that measuring cup with a knife because the precision can make a really big difference in your flour measurements. So here we go.
Lesanne, I'm not sure what you mean because the Challah cam showing the stand mixer is the pin. Are you possibly in are you in gallery view instead of in speaker view?
No, so I just see you. So when you talk, it keeps showing you. We don't see the camera that he has. So
Are
the
you on a
camera.
phone or a computer, Lesanne?
Oh, phone.
Okay, so here, if we spotlight that now, do you see that there?
Yeah, now I see.
There you go. So it has to be spotlighted to see that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Rabbi Max, I'm not sure what's supposed to be blending in my bowl right now.
Okay, so what I'm blending right now for a couple minutes is all the wet ingredients. I've got my eggs, my oil, my sugar, my salt, my yeast mixture, and my honey. And if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. Take your time. All these instructions are also in the recipe. And I'm sort of scraping the bottom here of my mixer bowl to make sure that I don't have any sugar stuck to the bottom or salt stuck to the bottom. Make sure this is a really well incorporated wet mixture before I start adding my flour.
Eileen, yes, it's definitely advisable to mix the flour. I usually just shake the container that my flour is in. That loosens it up so that it measures a little bit more consistently.
Yes, and the other thing about flour that I've learned through this process is that cups are actually not often the most precise way to measure flour. If you have a kitchen scale, I'm going to move the spotlight for a second.
Eggs.
If you have a kitchen scale, I measured out my flour already so I could talk to you more while we were starting this, but I measure it out and I weigh it, which helps me keep a precise amount of the flour because a cup doesn't always equal the same amount of ounces or grams of flour. It's just I guess the difference between a dry measure and a weighted measure. So as I put in the recipe, I tend to use about 40 ounces of flour, which should measure to about 8, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, tightly measured and scraped cups. So I'm gonna go back now to the Challah cam, the mixer cam here, and I'm gonna start adding my flour. And what I'm gonna do for this is, as you see here, I have a lot of flour in the bowl. I'm not adding it all at once though, because with challah, one of the things I've learned is that you don't want to overflour your challah. It's one of the ways you're going to get a dry challah. You want to bring just enough flour so that the dough comes together and can be kneaded without being too wet that it sticks to your hands, but it should still be tacky. It should still be moist when it comes together. So I'm going to start here, dumping a big chunk of the flour into there.
Hey, Max.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm probably shouldn't be here. I'm so behind.
That's okay. You're doing great, David.
I'm trying to figure out 3/8 of a cup of oil, 3/8 of a cup of honey, 3/8 of a cup of sugar. I
Yep.
don't have measuring cups that equal 3/8. I don't know what
Do you
that
have a
equals.
quarter?
I
Do you have a quarter
see.
cup?
If you have a quarter, you're going to do a full quarter and a half a quarter and do rough estimates there best you can.
I have a half and a third.
You have a half and a third.
So it's 3/4 of your half cup.
Yeah, that's good.
Got
It's
it.
about 3/4 of your half cup, and best you can measure there. I also use a quarter cup and do half when I measure that. So here we go.
Can
I've
I
added-
ask a question?
Please, hi Amy.
Hey, how you doing? My yeast, I haven't baked bread in a long time. My yeast is barely bubbling. What do you think
Give it
I
a few more minutes. Give it a few
Okay.
more minutes before you add things to it.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
so yeah, if your yeast, sometimes you know, yeast can be finicky that way. So you do want to give it a few more minutes. Try to let it bubble a little more.
Okay. I put a little sugar in to try to activate it, but it hasn't done much.
A little sugar. You put the full 2 tablespoons of sugar?
No, yes, I did.
Okay, and you put a little more then, you mean?
Okay, yeah.
You can put a little, yeah, you can put maybe another teaspoon of sugar in there. I don't think that'll hurt it.
Okay.
It's possible
Thanks.
your water didn't start warm enough also, so it might just take another few minutes.
That's right. If your water starts on the cooler side, sometimes it'll take a little bit longer. That's actually better than if your water starts too hot. Because if and when your water starts too hot, you kill your yeast before it has a chance to do its thing. If your water starts a little too cool, it just might take a little longer. I realized I also just turned on some water to boil because when we're ready to let our dough rise, you're going to want to let it rise in a pretty warm spot in your home. My home here in Altadena is pretty drafty, and Southern California is pretty dry as well. So I like to let my dough rise in the oven that's not turned on with sitting next to the dough and the bowl that'll have the dough in it. I put a pot that has some boiled water that is going to create some steaminess, some moisture, and some warmth in the oven, ambient warmth to let the dough have a nice warm place to rise. So if we can re-spotlight the Challah cam, Rabbi. There we go. So this is my first batch of the flour going in there, and you see I can go pretty fast there because I'm just trying to bring it all together. I'm gonna need the rest of my flour still. And look at that, I left my mixing attachment. I meant to switch to my dough hook, but I'll switch now in a second once this comes a little bit more together. Okay, and right now it looks almost like a cake batter. I've still got a lot of flour to add. So I'm gonna take this mixing attachment off. Take that off. I'm gonna get my dough hook in there, and I'm gonna add some more of my flour. Okay. Okay, now I've added a lot more of my flour. You see, I do still have some of the flour in my original flour bowl, but I've added a lot more of it. And so you see here that it's starting to work a little harder. It's starting to look more dough-like. It's gonna still take a few minutes here to bring it together. And I thought I saw a question in the chat, but Alana, I didn't hear what the question was.
The question was, I don't have a dough hook. Did you say you could use a regular hand mixer? To which I said, you can definitely use a hand mixer to mix it. But then when it comes to the kneading part,
Right.
I would recommend doing that by hand for roughly 8 to 12 minutes.
Yes. So you can use a hand mixer to initially bring the flour together because it'll help go quicker. I would switch about halfway through adding your flour. I would switch to a wooden spoon. And then once your dough comes together, you're going to need a little longer than I will need here with the dough hook. All right, so you see in my mixer that I still have flour on the sides. The mixer is going to keep bringing that together. But I'm still going to need I can tell I'm still going to need the rest of my flour here that I've measured out. But I'm going to let it mix in a little bit more first before I add it back. Add more. And it's starting to come more and more off the sides. So I'm ready just about for the rest of my flour. Okay, actually still left a little bit in my bowl here. When you're adding the flour, it is better to be conservative as you add it because, like I said before, the goal here of adding the flour is adding enough flour to get your workable dough and not over flouring your dough. So my dough here, if you can see there, it is really starting to come up off the sides. The dough hook is working pretty hard. I've turned it down only to level 1 or 2 at most. But it is still pretty wet there. So it's gonna need the rest of this flour in a second. Okay, and I'm gonna add in the rest of that flour. Okay, so that's all the flour I measured out at first. That was my 40 ounces. And one thing that's important here is that if after I've added all this flour, if my dough is still a little too sticky, if it's still sticking to the sides, I can add in a tablespoon at a time, a little bit more and more, till it gets to be the right consistency. For now, we're gonna give it another couple minutes here. You see it's coming together. And now you see that it's really coming up off the sides. And it's really not sticking very much to the bottom, but it's not at all smooth yet. So I'm gonna let it keep mixing here in my mixer for another 2 minutes or so. I'm gonna let it keep mixing there in my mixer another 2 minutes or so. And then I'm gonna bring it onto my kneading, my table back so I can knead by hand. And okay, so this is great. This is good. You see how it is now sticking again at the bottom? I'm gonna need to add some more flour there. I'm gonna need to add a little bit more. So I'm adding a tablespoon of flour. let it come back up from the bottom there.
If you have to keep adding flour, the dough, it takes a lot to overmix challah dough. And I say that because we're working with a lot of flour and it turns into a really big ball. And Rabbi Chaiken is going to explain like the elasticity of how elastic it should get. But you want it, are you, Eileen, are you working in a stand mixer or by hand? You were muted. Here's
KitchenAid stand mixer, but not one as fancy as that one.
So what I would recommend is to put in the amount of flour that is in the recipe and let it do its thing for some time, and then like 5 to 6 minutes. And if it's still really tacky, at that point, add flour a little bit at a time.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, so, okay, let's bring back the challah cam here. Can you still see, can you see me there? Okay, good. Now, you see how mine is stuck a little bit to the bottom there, but I'm gonna bring it out of there anyway to start kneading by hand, and I'm gonna add a little more flour here on my kneading surface. But it's a little bit sticky. I know I'm gonna need some more flour. Now that could be because my eggs were a little bigger than last week, or because any number of reasons why it's a little stickier than I maybe measured, if I over measured my honey a little bit maybe, or like I said, if the eggs were big. So there we go. I've got my dough. It's sticking to my fingers. That's okay.
Max,
Yes.
quick question.
Yes.
So the dough should be about 8 cups of flour?
About that. Flour is the hardest thing to measure. Like I said, I measure it by weight.
Oh.
At first.
8 to 8.5 cups, the recipe said. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've got a little more here, and I know it's gonna take all that. I'm gonna work it in now by hand. And that'll help me also make sure I've got my kitchen nice and messy, because who doesn't want a messy kitchen? And helps it come off my hand, as you see. But it also is gonna work in really nicely. And gonna help me start to knead. And as I knead, you see that it incorporates pretty well, and my dough on that hand is a little bit sticky still, but is not really sticking to my fingers anymore. So I've added a little bit more of the flour to bring this big dough ball together. So a few pieces still stuck on my fingers, but otherwise it's not too sticky, but it is still moist, and it's still giving you a little bit of it's still feeling pretty soft, starting to feel smooth. And what I like to do is I like to, I like to, yes, David, please.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. I have still turning the flour in my stand mixer,
Mm-hmm.
but the flour is flying out. It's
Start
like
slower. Start your mixer slower.
it's on one.
It happens even if you put like sometimes putting in a little bit less flour will
Yeah,
make it
it's
not mushroom, but that might just mean that when you go to knead it, you'll need to add a little bit more flour.
it's kind of too late because I dumped the last cup in or the last cup and a half in now, so it's all in. I can't even get it to mix without it flying everywhere.
Do you have
Do
more
that.
flour, David?
I don't need more flour. I think I need more liquid. I don't know. It's like I feel like I'm in a sitcom.
Well,
It's okay to get a little messy.
Oh.
Yeah, you might get a little messy. The kitchen is always a place where you're gonna get a little messy.
Okay, I'm I don't think I can even turn my mixer back on. That's the problem.
Do the best you can then.
I know. Okay.
Do the best you can.
Well,
And
just put it out on the board now and not use the mixer anymore.
yeah, if you dump it out to the board and just start working it, your hands might be sticky at first, but once you work that flour in, right, you start to see if your dough is starting to come together into a nice ball here, and it's pretty smooth. And it's not sticking to my hands anymore. This is the leftover from before, but it's really not sticking to my hands, this big ball here, because I've got enough flour in there. Now I'm gonna need, and I like to tell my my Amazon device, and I'll say, Alexa, set a timer for 4 minutes. So I know that I wanna keep working this dough for the next 4 minutes or so. And it's gonna stay smooth, it's gonna get even smoother. And again, it's a little bit tacky, but not sticking to my fingers. Actually, it is a little sticky today. And see, it's one of the other beautiful things about baking that I've found is that sometimes there is surprises along the way, and you have to learn to adjust. David was doing that before with in his situation, in his kitchen. I do think I want even a little bit more flour here.
It also like has been rainy the last day or so, which might contribute to it also.
Could be, yeah. The atmosphere, so many things contribute here. I'm gonna actually add a little bit more flour. Just a little bit more. On top there. Because I don't want it sticking to the bottom of my cutting board here. I'd want it to be able to be kneaded. There we go. And part of the reason that you need dough, and I'm certainly not a professional about this, but part of the reason you're kneading it is because you want that yeast. You're working up gluten. You're working the yeast and the gluten together, and you want it to be able to create the rise that eventually gives your challah its delicious, light, fluffy texture. And so it's part of the reason why we're going to break in a couple minutes, about 2 o'clock, so that our dough can rise over the next 2.5 hours. And we'll come back at 4:30. We'll come back to shape our loaves and to hopefully see doughs that have risen wonderfully.
Sandy, did you have a question? I see your hand up.
I do, but it may be for later. I just have a question on the, if you're going to do one cinnamon roll, one cinnamon challah,
Yep.
when do you add all that other stuff like the sugar, the cinnamon, and the vegetable oil?
That you're going to add once you're shaping your loaves later on. So I have some of my sugar and my cinnamon ready to go here for later, but I just did that to get ahead of the game. And you're not going to add that until after your dough rises the first rise.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I separated everything earlier, so this is it's not as hard as I thought it would be.
Carol, yes, one of us can stay on as you keep kneading. No worries.
Oh no, we're
Thank
going to
you.
stay on until everyone is ready to their first rise. So even if that's 5-10 past the hour, that's fine. But we try to time it out so that everyone would have about 2.5 hours for your dough to rise. Because I've also, Rabbi Ravish, you also bake challah, so you tell me if you've experienced otherwise. But I don't think it's pretty hard to let it rise for too long, but it's easy to let it rise not enough.
My mom actually.
Alexa, stop.
My mom actually told me that you can actually let it overrise, and it then will impact. I don't remember what she said it was going to impact, but because I said the same thing, and I was had a meeting or whatever, and she's like, no, you need to take it out and at least punch it down. But also my recipe is a little bit different than Rabbi Chaiken's, and it only rises for an hour. And then
wow.
and then in braids it rises for another hour, but the first rise.
So our second rise is only going to be 20 minutes, 25 minutes for that second rise after we shape our loaves later on. So my timer went off for my 4 minutes. I've got a pretty nice, workable, tacky but not sticky dough. And I'm going to roll it into a nice ball. I'm going to see how smooth that is. And I'm going to bring it over to I've got a nice dough ball there. And I'm going to bring my oiled pot over here, this bowl over here, to add my dough. It's going to be a little wet now from the oil, a little bit, not too much, but nice and smooth in there. And I'm going to cover it with saran wrap, and I'm going to let it go for a first rise. If you are still kneading, which I know a lot of you are, if you're still kneading, again, you want to make sure that your dough is workable. You want it to still feel a little bit moist. Part of this is because we added honey to the wet mixture. This is a pretty wet challah dough in general.
I have a question.
Yes.
Given the fact that you can underrise it but not overrise it, if you're making half a recipe, and do you still let it rise for the 2 hours?
Yes, even if you're making half of this recipe, you're still going to let it rise the same amount of time. I think so. I think so. What you want to do though, so you see how I see here in my my bowl, this is going to at least double in size by the time we come back later on. It's going to at least double in size, maybe a little more than that. And what I'm going to do, as the recipe says, I'm going to punch it down later on. And I'm going to need a little bit later to knead some of the, you're going to need a few minutes once it's risen as well. So I'm setting my dough to rise here. And we can take off the Torah cam for a second, and I can come maybe to gallery view, take a look, see how other folks are doing. If you have questions, a lot of people with their cameras off. Hopefully that's a good sign that you're working your dough, you're kneading. So cooking spray will work in the bowl for the rising bowl instead of oil. Yes, absolutely.
Max,
Yes.
maybe I just need to keep kneading, but my dough seems kind of like flaky.
Keep kneading.
It's
Keep
like in
kneading.
shreds. It's like kind of in shreds, or I don't know what to call it.
You're gonna if you keep kneading, that you should smooth some of that out. That's when that has happened to me. I believe part of the reason has been that there's some parts of the dough that are wetter than others, so that the flaky parts are the parts that are drier, right? So you're mixing as you continue to knead the whole dough together. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of work. Sandy, look at that, beautiful. Sandy's got a beautiful dough there. She showed us. Who else has got questions? So, any other questions if you have any?
I have one if you don't mind.
Megan, please.
Thank you. You had said something to the effect of being able to rise it in a low oven with some water, like using the oven as a coping.
The oven should be completely off. I use my oven completely off, but I add a pot of some boiling water to create the steam in there, to create a little bit of moisture atmosphere for the dough. The truth is that works for me in my kitchen. And Megan, are you here in Southern California?
No, I'm in Arizona.
Arizona. So also in a drier climate, that might work well for you. But this is one of those places where in some ways is idiosyncratic, and there's going to be some trial and error for you. I hope it works out if you go that way. If you're not using that method, you just want to find a nice cozy spot in your kitchen, maybe by if there's a window with some sun coming through. But you want to find a cozy spot in your house. My cousin, when she lets dough rise not for challah, but for another baked for homemade yeasted rolls, dinner rolls, she likes to put her dough on top of the radiator. Not directly on top. She puts a book or a wood something between, and sets the bowl on top of the radiator there, nice and cozy. That's the kind of thing that is really varies a lot by where you are in the climate and how warm it is in your home, in your kitchen.
Rabbi Chaiken, you were also talking about overnight rising a couple weeks ago, right?
Yes. So I've done that with this recipe, and what I do when I've done that is let it start to rise for about 30 to 45 minutes before putting it in the fridge. And then let it go in the fridge until about 2 hours before I want to knead it. So it can come back to room temperature. The dough can come back to room temperature, and before I start to shape the loaves. And that's worked well for this recipe too. It's just a different approach. David, you're muted there, David. I see you trying to talk.
I said, I don't think mine's so good.
Well, if you want to adjust your camera, we can take a look. But if you're feeling self-conscious, that's okay too. It's everyone's trying something new here today.
I can see if I can move my I have it on my iPad, so it gets a little tricky. I don't know if you can see it.
I do see it. Keep kneading. I think you're doing well. You want to keep kneading that, I think. Okay. So Sandy, if you set your alarm for 4:15 or so, 2.5, that's about 2.5 hours, then you'll punch it down then. And again, we're going to be back on this same Zoom room at 4:30 to shape our loaves, and my husband just said, "Oh, we're gonna have fresh challah for Shabbat." Yes, dear, that's how this works. This Thursday, we're gonna have fresh challah tomorrow for Shabbat. Hello, Rabbi. Can I use my proof setting? Ooh, okay. So I don't. This Sherry, what a great question. I don't have an oven with a proof setting. So if you're gonna use the proof setting in the oven, I would not add anything. I would just use the proof setting, and let it proof. But I full disclosure, I don't have that. So you're on your own in that regard. And you know, best of luck. I'm sure that'll be very effective, because a proof setting in an oven will almost certainly help to create the right atmosphere for the dough to rise.
The only thing I would say about proofing, that I would have turned the proof function on, because when an oven first starts, it's a blast of hot air.
That's good. That's a good point, Amy. And Kate has a good point. David, this might help you a little bit. If you put a little oil on your hands, just a little bit on your hands to knead more, it might help smooth out that dough a little bit if you're still having trouble. Thanks, Kate. That's a great idea.
Thank you. It's actually, I think, starting to come together.
I'm sure. Good. We knew it would. We knew it would. It can take a little while.
You know, maybe we're just too impatient in this world. We're not used to kneading dough.
We are not. And patience. You know, David, thank you for throwing that out there. I think most of us are getting close to our dough being ready to rise. I see Duke there, ready, washing your hands already. Way to go. I'm going to share the text sheet once more, because I have here a poem by Alden Solovey, a friend of our congregation. This is called Recipe for a Life. 1 cup gratitude, 2 tablespoons humility, half a teaspoon pride, 5 cloves of love, 2 crushed, 4 seeds forgiveness, 2 tall stalks strength, 1 tablespoon surrender, 2 sprigs of awe, 3 shoots of wonder, half a cup of hard knocks melted, 1 cup fresh squeezed joy, half a cup pounded sorrow, 1 cup wisdom sifted, 1 gleaming ray of light, 2 cubes compassion, dash of fleeting time, pinch of coarse suffering, zest of music, combine ingredients, stir with abandon, invite friends, sing and pray. When I first heard that poem, I was just really inspired by the beauty of that idea, right? That recipes in many ways can be symbols for our lives, right? They can be an opportunity to bring the joy, to bring the patience, David, that you said we are sometimes lacking, to bring a sense of I love that, fresh squeezed joy, right? To what we're doing. That's really what this afternoon has been about for us here at Kol Ami. I'm a rabbi. I am not a chef on the Food Network. Gregory, yes, I'm going to post here actually the link to the whole text sheet that you can save that text sheet. That link also has has a link to buy Alden's book. You can buy the book, which is called This Precious Life. There's a link on that source sheet that'll take you right to purchase the book if you'd like. It's prayer poetry. That's a beautiful piece of. It's a beautiful book that to own and add to your resources in your Jewish library. Carol, you got a question there?
Yes, my computer lost power, so I lost 4 or 5 minutes of class. How much oil do I put in the bowl that I'm going to be putting the?
You want the bowl to be basically greased. So if you spray it, you can spray it. I like to also make sure that the ball of dough is sort of loosely, lightly, certainly not drenched, but lightly
Coated?
Wet with oil before it rises, because it helps keep it smooth, it helps keep it nice and moist. Yeah, So I don't usually measure how much oil I put into my bowl. It's probably usually about a teaspoon or two that then spread around the bowl, and then make sure that it gets on both sides of my dough ball. A capful, Sandy. Yeah, that's about that, right? It's about a teaspoon or two is a capful. That's about. I think we're in agreement there.
At some point, you did something for 4 minutes. Was that kneading it?
I was kneading. Yeah, that was my kneading after that was my kneading. Yes. Okay, so most of us, at least those of us that I can see, look like we're close to being, if not already, in our first rise. Michael, looks like you all are doing okay there, rising your challah too. Hi,
David,
Michael.
you got it.
Oh, David, look at that. Beautiful, beautiful. And
Patience and time.
Patience and time. Carol, look at that. Not sticking to your hands. Nice and kneadable, workable, gorgeous. Just gorgeous. Welcome back. We're gonna start letting folks in. I see Sandy there. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Ashley. Nice to see y'all. Oh, wait, let's see here for a second. Okay, yes, participants y'all can unmute yourselves as needed still, but better to stay muted if you don't have a question. And once it hits, we have people still coming into the room now, of course. So once it's officially 4:30, we'll get back to our dough. Hopefully your dough is nice and puffy, nice and big and risen. Duke, show us what you got there. Oh yeah, look at that.
Oh boy.
Oh
That's
boy.
beautiful.
Challah
And Sandy's
for 2
not
weeks
wasting.
worth.
Sandy's not wasting any time.
There you go. There you go, Sandy. I love it. Love it.
Ashley, where's your challah dough?
You can show us,
Yeah,
if you want.
Rabbi Chaiken and I were just talking about.
Very nice.
We're just talking about how Max doesn't like to cut it in half because the math gets too complicated. So I'm even more impressed that you cut the dough in half, and it looks amazing.
It was all guesstimation, really. And I know with baking, you're not supposed to do that, but I was just like,
that's all right.
I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
it's a hard recipe to cut in half. I've thought about it because you're gonna have 2 large loaves. So you're gonna have one maybe for tomorrow for Shabbat and one maybe for next week. The last week you'd have challah before Passover. And
or one for Friday and one for Saturday.
One for Friday, one for Saturday, or you could do half and half if you're doing the cinnamon swirl loaf. Maybe you'll have half of that this week's, freeze half. If you don't know, bread freezes really well. Bread freezes like really, really well. So there's no hard. If this is the fun part of the challah process, that you're gonna if you want to make it into 2 loaves, you can do it as 2. If you want to do it as 3 smaller or even 4 smaller loaves, you do you, right? I mean, that's what this is all about at that point. There's not really a wrong way to divvy up your loaves. I am going to do 2 loaves here. I'm going to do one plain with everything bagel seasoning on one of them, on the plain one, and that one I'm going to do a 3-strand. Then I'm going to do the cinnamon swirl. I'm going to do the cinnamon swirl as a 5-strand, and I'll show you about that in a moment. So if you have not yet punched down your dough, take that dough is really nice and big. The first thing you want to do is punch it down. Oh yeah, nice punch.
Take out your frustrations from the week.
Absolutely, take out those frustrations if you got. You're going to want to knead for a couple minutes now. You're going to want to knead for a couple of minutes. And I think you can see my hands on the holocam there. Maybe we can spotlight the holocam, Rabbi?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm going to knead here for a couple minutes. One thing that you may not know is that what you are making so far is not actually challah yet. What you're making so far, yes, it is challah. It's a challah recipe, of course. But challah is a technical term in Jewish tradition, and it doesn't actually refer to the bread itself. Technically, it actually technically refers to the part that we will separate from the dough, and that we will separate. That part is called challah, and I'm gonna teach you a little bit about that, and we're gonna learn the blessing for separating that. So as you're kneading you're kneading your dough here before you separate it into the 2 or 3 or 4 loaves, and then you're going to separate even further for the different strands to braid. But beautifully, the act of taking a challah is what it's called. You take challah, or you separate challah from your dough. That's what makes challah challah. It's what makes so it takes a delicious enriched bread dough and turns it into challah. And so welcome back if you're still joining us. I think there's a few people still maybe just coming in from the waiting room, it looks like. Welcome back. So I'm just about ready now to separate this into I'm making 2 loaves, like the recipe suggests, 2 large loaves. But really, you can do whatever. You can do 3, you can do 4. What you're gonna want to do, if you have a kitchen scale, it's always good once you've separated your loaves and you're separating into the strands for braiding. It's really good to weigh them, because weighing them helps them be even and helps you get chalot that look really pretty, that look really nice. So I've been a couple minutes here.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if separating the dough is what you call taking the challah, what is the blessing you say after you've braided it and you've taken a piece of dough from the braid?
Great question. So we're going to learn that. Did I plant you there? Was that Eileen? I think I might have planted you with that question, Eileen, but I didn't. Really perfect question for us right now. So what we're going to do here, you don't have to braid it first to take it. You can, once you separate your main big dough into these smaller balls of dough for your loaves. Here, I'm gonna grab a knife real quick, and I'm gonna separate this. I'm gonna try and make sure I have roughly equal halves here. Let's see. That one about 37 ounces, and this one is a little lighter, 34. Okay, that's good. That's good. Let's leave that as that will become my cinnamon swirl. Perfect. So I have these 2 dough balls here. I've rolled them. I've sort of kneaded them for a couple minutes, and I've rolled them back into a nice round ball. Especially if you don't have a kitchen scale, part of the benefit of rolling it into a round shape is that you can better assess how much is there. So I'm gonna set that aside for my second loaf. But before I separate this ball now into 3 nice long strands for braiding, I will ask Rabbi Rabashah to share the screen so we can learn a little bit about this act of separating the dough. So we can stop there you go.
One step ahead of you.
Thank you. So the first text here is from Numbers. And this text is where the idea of challah, it comes from originally in the Torah. It's from the book of Numbers, chapter 15. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem B'voachem el haaretz, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I bring you into, then it shall be that when you eat from the bread of the land, you shall set apart a portion for a gift unto Adonai, unto the Eternal One. Of the beginning, reshit of your dough, you shall donate a cake, challah, as a gift. And that, as that which is given on the threshing floor, so shall you give it from the first. Again, that word reshit, listen to that carefully. Sounds like bereshit, in the beginning. Of your dough, you shall give unto the Eternal a portion for the gift throughout the generations. Now, that word of a gift is the word truma. And that word might be familiar to you because truma is one of the names of the Torah portions. It refers not just to the gift or a sacrifice of dough, but a sacrifice also of, in this case of dough, and it also in general can be a sacrifice of any gift given in the sacrificial worship of the temple. It can be a truma, an offering. We're going to come back to this little midrash from Bereshit Rabbah. It's a really pretty one, about the idea that the world was created for this idea of giving back as a partnership in creation. We'll come back to it though, because I want to teach the blessing so that everyone can take their challah, say the blessing. And so this is from a text, a code of law, and it teaches about the blessing you say when you separate challah. So dough which is made of any of the 5 grains that are grown traditionally in the land of Israel require the separation of challah traditionally. And before separating challah, the following blessing is said. And so you can say it with me if you can see it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehafrish challah. We'll come back to the precise ending of the blessing because there are some variations there too. Blessed are you, Eternal One, our God, Sovereign of the universe, who has made us holy through your mitzvot and has commanded us to separate challah. Then you're going to take a piece of dough, roughly the size of an olive. I like to take a big olive size there. You can see in the challah cam, Rabbi.
Get in there. Just stopped sharing the screen.
That's okay.
And now we're spotlighting. So
I took this olive sized piece, maybe a bit bigger than an olive, and I'm going to set that aside there in the corner. Now there are different traditions as to what you do with that challah. Some people just throw it away because traditionally you would burn it up, but some people today don't like it can be messy to burn it up or wrap it in foil and burn it. But I will put it there for now. I'm going to wrap it in foil and burn it when we get closer. But now I've got my first loaf. I've taken challah from it. Challah taken. Now this is officially going to be a challah. And I'm going to, once again, now separate this into 3 even strands as best I can. I'm going to weigh them out to make sure they're as even as possible. I have already mixed my egg wash. If you haven't yet, that's okay. It's just 1 egg, about a teaspoon of water, and a little drizzle of honey in the egg wash. And again, I'm going to weigh these bits of dough to try and get as even as possible between them. That one's too big, needs to take some out. Okay, now we're going to be about even between these 3. Okay, so
Bess asked a really important question. Must the blessing be done for each separate loaf?
I believe that's the intention behind the ritual. Yes. Part of the reason, if we go back to that text sheet, we see this. We see this in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It says, I think it says bread made from any of these grains, right? So if you're making a loaf of bread, if you want to make that bread challah, then you take that offering from each one. There might be different variances in tradition, so I could be mistaken about that. But but I will take it from both loaves in this instance. There's also a traditional requirement. This is the teaching the blessing here is sort of the first thing that, if you don't know about the blessing, it's good to know about the blessing. There are a lot of details in this tradition and in Judaism at large. There's always more details, almost always, that can be learned and discerned. And so there certainly are variations in the blessing as well. So now I'm just rolling these out into nice, let's put that there. Nice long strands. Want them to be as even as possible. I don't like that there at the bottom. But
Max,
there's,
sorry.
yes.
It's David. I'm
Hi,
sorry.
David.
I signed on like 2 or 3 minutes late, so I have everything prepared. I see you're a few steps ahead of me. I'm just not sure
Okay.
what to do with my gigantic bowl of dough.
Punch it down and knead it for a couple minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Start by punching it down, kneading it for a couple of minutes. So here we are. That's one of my long strands there. And the blessing itself, remember, there are a few variations. So remember that word truma that I mentioned? Sephardic custom adds the word truma after the blessing. So they finish Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehafrish challah truma, to separate challah as truma, as the offering. And some Ashkenazi customs even also add words too. So they might add the words min ha'isa, which means to separate challah from the dough. Isa meaning dough. And so the hafrish challah min ha'isa is another way to say the blessing, separate challah from the dough. Okay, this one was easier there. Nice and long. I've got nice long strands here. And I've got my third one. So this is my 3 braid. If you're new to braiding challah, the 3 is going to be your easiest braid. And it's really a lot like braiding hair. If you've ever braided hair, I was taught to braid by my first grade teacher, Mrs. Buckman. She taught all of us to braid using, I guess we used lanyard or yarn or something. And she taught us to braid. And braiding challah really is not very different than any 3-strand braid that you've done before. So I've got my 3 strands here. They're pretty even. Yes.
How long do you want them to be?
Mine are a little more than a foot here. They are covering they're covering my whole cutting board. I guess they're probably 2 feet long. This is the part of the process though that is more artistic and some, if I wanted to cut these all in half and then make them thinner, I could try a 6-strand. I'm not going to do that now because I'm not very good at a 6-strand, and I'd rather show you the 3, make sure we can all do that one. But there are really almost infinite variations at this point of how to braid and shape challah beautifully. So here we are. I'm going to start pinching them together at the top, and I'm going to simply go right over center, left over center, right over center. And I want to keep it nice and tight as much as I can. That's going to help it be prettier and tighter as I go through. Right over center, left over center, right over center, and so on and so forth till the very bottom here. Okay, and you see these came apart a little bit. That's okay, actually, because I can now finish. I'll turn this around. That one is still not happy, but I'll turn this around and I'll finish again. Left under center. This is the reverse, right under center on the top that I was just getting it finished up there. And here we have a 3 braid challah loaf. I'm gonna lay it nice and gently onto my tray. And if you haven't already, it's time to preheat your oven to 350 for this recipe. Time to preheat your oven to 350. Now that one's doing fine. It is gonna keep rising there. I am going to egg wash it now. I'm gonna egg wash it now once, and I'm not gonna add my seeds yet. I'm gonna add them after I egg wash it a second time in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes before we put these in the oven. So here we go. Nice egg wash. I know some people don't like the silicone brushes for egg wash. It's all I've got, so that's what I use. If you don't have a brush, you can gently use a spoon, but you really want to, if you ideally have a brush to use.
We used to use a spoon and then use the back of the spoon to
Right,
it.
excuse me, yes, the back of the spoon is a very important detail there if you're using a spoon, but you want to be really gentle. There we go, nice and washed. Get those sides.
And this is what gives it that beautiful golden color.
Exactly. The egg wash gives it that nice golden brown color you're going to look for in the top to help determine that it's done, but also to help it be beautiful and help beautify your Shabbat. So now I've got my other loaf, and for the cinnamon swirl, this is a lot of fun. It's a little bit different than rolling it out with the 3 strands. I'm going to take challah again. So Rabbi, if you can return us to that blessing that everyone can see again if they want to say the blessing along with me. Of course, you can always say amen as well to my blessing. That's a perfectly reasonable way to participate in the blessing. And I'm going to say this according to the Sephardi custom this time, and I'm going to say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'hafrish challah truma. Blessed are you, eternal one, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has made us holy through your commandments and sanctified us, commanding us to take challah as truma. So I have that another piece. I have another piece here, about the size of about the size of a nice big olive. Not too big, not too small. One interesting thing about taking challah actually is that it has, if you're making, let's say you're making a small amount of bread, if you're only making, let's say, I don't know the exact requirements, I have to admit, but you have to be making a certain quantity in order to take challah. You have to have your loaves be a certain size. Even at half this recipe, I think you're still covered in that size, but going much smaller, if you're making smaller amounts of bread, there is traditional requirements of it being large enough to take the challah from. So I want 5 of these now. I'm going to do a 5-strand for the cinnamon sugar. And these are not going to be even. We're going to have to do some readjusting here, but let's see. That one's going to be big. That's too big, yep. Here, let's put them there. There, it should be about 5. Still too big. So the beautiful thing about my kitchen scale here is that it's an automatic, it's a digital kitchen scale, and it, in this case, is helping me get, oh, I should actually do that 7, not 5, 7. There we go. Helping me get each little ball of dough to be, in this case, about 7 ounces, so that all 5 of them will be roughly equal in size when I am ready to roll them out. All right, these are good. These are about even in size now, these 5. I'm going to set aside 4 of them because for this, for the cinnamon swirl, first of all, I have my about half a cup of sugar and about a big tablespoon of cinnamon. I'm going to add to that a tablespoon of vegetable oil, just to give it a little bit of moisture to come together. Mix that up. Delicious, sweet, cinnamony deliciousness. Now, this is sort of going to become a combination. It's not really going to be like a babka, because a babka, you have to do really fancy stuff with. You probably need a little bit more moisture in the mixture for a babka. Similarly for cinnamon rolls, if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, you need some more moisture in the mixture. We don't want to add a lot of moisture to our challah dough. That's why this mixture has this proportion. You've used a little bit of olive oil to make sure that it'll have a little bit of moisture to stick into the dough once we roll it out. But it's mostly a crumbly cinnamon sugar there, ready for us to add to each of our 5 strands. So I have my rolling pin, and in this case, I'm going to start with a bit of a rectangle, sort of, and I want to roll this out. Really want to roll it out long and thin. And notice that the dough starts to come back as soon as I roll it. That's expected because the dough is going to resist being worked in that way. And so what we want to do is roll it reasonably quickly, get it as long and flat as we can. Working fairly quickly though, because we do want to let this have a little more time once it's fully shaped to rise like the other challah is here, our plain loaf. And, all right, so that's, you see it's pretty long. These are going to be short. I'm doing a 5 strand, so it's not going to be as long as the other one, even if I was doing it plain. But I'll take a tablespoon, maybe a little more to there, flatten it out here. And now, this is perhaps the hardest part. I want to roll this as tightly as possible so that we get as much of that swirl effect as we can into the final product. So I'm trying to get this nice and tight, rolled up. At the end, I want to pinch it, really make sure it's closed there. And Again, I'm keeping it still really as tight as I can all the way through. And I'm gonna squeeze that end on both sides so that it's really closed and tight. And that's one of my cinnamon swirl strands ready to sit while I do the other 4. So it's going to sit there, and I'm going to take my next ball of dough and repeat. Okay, so I've got a bit of a rectangle there. Pull it out. I always do the cinnamon second if I'm doing a plain loaf, because the cinnamon gets everywhere. So you got to really try to, and if you don't want it in the first loaf, you have to do that second. Now, a lot of people are doing tons of different flavors. This could work with other flavors or other fillings too. This technique. I've never tried myself, but I've seen some people use pesto for nice savory pesto challah this way. I have tried once scallion and onion. Was really tasty. And at Rosh Hashanah, you could also try with some apples. And there's plenty of honey in the dough, but you could try with some apples too. But again, you want to keep the moisture content pretty, in my experience, pretty low when you're adding this. So you try to keep that's, it's important to keep in mind. And there are also other techniques for adding flavors and fillings. So if you have a raisin challah, for instance, the raisin challah, which is traditional in Ashkenazi communities for sweetness for Rosh Hashanah, raisin challah, you want to actually add the raisins when you're kneading the first. You want to split your dough into your loaves before you let it rise. So you want to add those raisins really early let it rise with the raisins in there, is my understanding. Anyone have questions while we're still shaping our loaves here?
Max, it's David again. Listen, do I have to do how many are you doing on the cinnamon one?
You can do it you can also do it as a 3. You can also do it as a 3. It's very easy to do it as a 3.
Yeah, my dough is really hard to work with. It's I don't know what you call it, sort of springing back, or
it is. That's actually a good sign. That means that we expect it to spring back a little bit like that, David. So that's not a bad thing, but it is going to be hard to work with. So if you want to do this with only 3, then absolutely you can do it with 3.
I'm going to try it 3.
And then the 3 is going to be the same kind of braid as the first loaf. It's a plain loaf.
Mine didn't come out with as many braids as yours. Mine's sort of thicker.
That's okay.
It's kind of thicker.
Yep, it depends how long you made your strands to begin with, right? So if you had really longer strands, they're going to have more braids, and if you had shorter strands, they're going to have fewer. The braiding is where really fancy professional bakers can get really fancy with what their technique. Instagram is a great place to go and find much fancier chalot than I can make for you. But
I literally just put an Instagram page in the chat if you want to look at really, really intricate ones.
Some really fancy ones. And it really, everyone is gonna, certainly a learning curve for me in braiding. It still is. As I mentioned before, you know, six strand braids, even numbers are really difficult, but they can look really pretty when you do them well. I can't do them very well, so so maybe we'll learn that together for next time. But yeah, even numbers can be really pretty, but they're certainly more difficult in my experience than odd numbers. So here's my third of 5. Keeping it nice and tight there with the cinnamon swirl.
Carol, is your hand up on purpose?
I also asked in the chat, but you really add a little bit of vegetable oil to the cinnamon sugar mix?
I do,
Yeah,
a little
just
bit.
a little bit.
It's about, it's no more than a tablespoon, and I mix it really well.
Okay, because I saw it said, yeah, 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. Okay.
That's what I add there.
You can tell I'm a little behind.
That's all right. That's all right. No,
I did all my pieces of dough at the same time when I pushed them down because I don't have a rolling pin. Could not find it or pour them.
Oh, yeah. So this rolling pin, yeah, I like this rolling pin. I can't remember when I got it, but it's been very helpful for Hamantaschen, especially. It's very helpful to have a rolling pin if you've got one when you do Hamantaschen. Here, usually it's not something you'd use for challah, but in this particular loaf with the cinnamon swirl, it comes in handy.
Anything that I don't use more than once or twice a year, I put away somewhere where then I can't find it.
Yeah, I understand that problem. I hear you. That happens to me with a lot of my books in my office. And well, lately, some of you have probably been on the Zoom with me at certain times when I've looked behind me in the home office here and said, I wonder if that book is here or at Temple. And sometimes the answer is here and sometimes the answer is at Temple. But it has not been easy that way. Okay. Okay, so my edges are nice and squeezed together in the middle there. Also together. You see here, you can still see in the challah cam, I've got 4 out of my 5 for this cinnamon swirl loaf. And I'll do my last one now. Get it nice and ready. All right, and I'll use the rest of this. Okay. So when you're doing a 5 braid, it's really not very much different than the 3, except you're always taking from the outside and crossing over 2 instead of crossing over the 1 that's between the outside and the middle. That's how I know to do 5. There are multiple ways. Again, YouTube and YouTube and Instagram really are the best ways to find new techniques for braiding. That's how I've been doing it throughout the pandemic. I'm sure that Rabbi Rabishal would agree that they, if you Google or YouTube search for 4-strand, 6-strand, 8-strand, 7, I mean, there's so many. It's a rabbit hole that's beautiful and mouth-watering all at once for you to explore. And
That's how I learned how to braid in a circle for Rosh Hashanah.
oh, see, there you go. And there's multiple ways to do that, I think. But I've got now my 5 cinnamon swirl strands here. Okay, and I will turn this way so you can watch it this way. I've got to do a little stretch. Okay. So again, I'm gonna start bringing them close together at the top. And I'm not gonna pinch them together yet because I know that they won't stay quite yet, but I'll pinch them together at the end. What I'm gonna start with is right side, my right, which looks like you see that on your left there. So my right side over 2, and then take these 2. Okay, and that's gonna become my first crossover there. And then similarly, left side over into the middle. Okay, those are going there. Right side gonna cross over again. Now my 2 that are on the right come out. My far left cross over to the middle. And so on and so forth. Right over 2, pull to the corner. Now my far left over 2, pull to the corner. And you see it's actually creating it'll be a bit taller in some ways because you've got more height and more different, strands working here together. Left over 2. As I get towards the end, it gets a little bit trickier. We'll pull them tight. And I'm going to pinch it all together at the end and sort of tuck it underneath that side of the loaf. And for what's left here, I'm going to turn my board around. And here, it's again just a little bit reversed. So the right side comes under 2. The left comes under 2. I think that works. Yeah, that's what I want. That will then come under 2. And
So interesting. Everybody has different braiding styles. I'm really curious how everybody else is braiding their chalot.
So the edges there are always a little tricky for me, but now I've got a 5 braid here ready to sit and rise a little longer. I'm gonna egg wash it now too. You can use the same egg wash for both loaves. I never used a different egg wash. I should say I have never used a secondary egg wash because of the flavor of the bread. So I'm gonna egg wash here. And while we're waiting a few more minutes to let these rise a little longer before I put them in the oven, I see what time we have. We have 5:12. Okay, so in about 15 minutes, I'll put them in the oven. And once you put your loaves in the oven, depending on the strength of your oven, and depending on if you've done 2 loaves from the full recipe, or if you've done more, right? You will need to adjust your cooking time. These will take at 350. They'll take 37 to 40 minutes because they're nice, they're big loaves. And I'll check them periodically. I'll check them at about 30 minutes to make sure that I still think they need that long. Our oven can be a little finicky here in Altadena. If you have made 3, I usually find that 3 loaves from this recipe take somewhere between 33 to 36 minutes. Similarly, 4 loaves take something like 30 to 33 minutes. And that is all a function of the size of the loaves. I'm looking, when they're done, I'm looking for a nice dark brown color on top. And I'm looking for them when I take them out and take a look underneath, if I sort of tap at the bottom, I want to hear it pretty hollow. I usually let them cool on the baking sheet here for about 5 minutes before transferring to wire rack to cool all the way. And that's it. I am going to wrap these two challah separations in foil and cook them that way as well. So, Rabbi, if we can go to the screen share again, it's a perfect time to share that last bit of text.
Oh no, it disappeared. Hang on.
So this midrash is from Bereshit Rabbah, the Genesis Rabbah, and it uses a little bit of Hebrew wordplay to connect this idea of challah to the very beginning of all creation. So it says here, Rabbi Huna says in the name of Rabbi Matana, interestingly, that rabbi's name means gift. Curious. The world was created in the merit of 3 things: challah, tithes, and first fruits. Because the meaning of in the beginning, Bereshit, God created, must also refer to challah, as it says in Numbers chapter 15, with the beginning, Reshit, of your doughs, and the verse we heard earlier above on the page. And it must also refer to tithes, as it says in Deuteronomy 18, the beginning, Reshit, of your grains should be tithed. If you go to Deuteronomy there, you'll see the whole verse. And it must also refer to first fruits, Bikurim, as it says in the book of Exodus, the beginning, Reshit, of the fruits of the land. So the rabbis see this word Reshit, this word beginning, right, or from the start, and it sparks their imagination, because it doesn't occur very often, this word Reshit. It's pretty rare, in fact, and so it sparks their imagination, and they see it and connect these ideas that the world itself, the whole world, was actually created because of the merit of these 3 things, which we humans have to do in partnership with nature and with creation. So challah is bread. And if you remember from the blessing of hamotzi, which may be very familiar to some of you, we say the motzi before we eat any bread. And the translation is, blessed are you, eternal one, our God, who brings forth bread from the earth. Well, last time I checked, ain't no such thing as a bread tree or a bread bush, right? Actually, we have to be part of that process. So we're blessing the possibility that we help to make real. And challah, when we take that piece of dough and we offer it as a gift, as truma, we are actually then coming full circle, acknowledging miraculousness of a world that provides for the possibility that we can be partners in creation to sustain ourselves. Similarly, tithes and first fruits. So tithes, in the traditional biblical context and the biblical economy, are not just taxes, but they are a set amount of your crops that are to be offered for the welfare of the Levites who didn't have land, and for the needy. Again, right, a recognition that from the beginning, here, and according to this midrash, according to this sacred interpretation, from the beginning, the world was created for the merit of our ability to help sustain one another through giving. And then first fruits, again, the first fruits of the crops, the first fruits, the bikurim, the first harvest is another one of those things for which the whole world was created for its merit, that we might be able to one day plant crops and harvest from them, from trees, fruit of trees, and create, by doing so, a moment of gratitude and acknowledgement for all creation. So this text source sheet is in your chat. It's for you, both these traditional texts that we studied this late afternoon, as well as the contemporary texts and blessing that we looked at earlier this afternoon when we put our dough together. There, as a gift for you to sort of take home and bookmark if you'd like, you may certainly keep those texts. But yeah, I'm so glad that you've all been here this afternoon as we've put together Challah and made that and done this together. So if there are further questions, please, I'm happy to take them. My loaves, I'm going to give another 5 minutes before I put them in the oven. And the holocam here, you see that this one, the first one has, you see it's risen a little bit more since I put it there. You can probably tell that if you were looking closely. This one's also doing fine. It's having trouble there at the edge. I'm gonna try to keep it together. There. It might split apart a bit, but that's okay. Before I put them in the oven, I'm gonna egg wash them once more, and I'm going to add to the plain loaf the everything bagel seasoning. And if you're someone who likes challah French toast and you made one of these cinnamon swirl loaves, just wait until you try the cinnamon swirl French toast. And decadent breakfast or brunch, certainly here in the Chaiken Shapiro household. Carol has a question.
Nope, I'm good.
Oh, you're good.
Sorry,
okay.
I didn't take it
That's
down
all
from
right.
before. But this is my first time I've ever braided a 5-strand before. I've done 3 strands forever.
Awesome.
When you're mentioning the round challah for high holidays, I usually do a regular challah, then just connect them and put them in a round cake pan. That keeps it shaped.
That's one way to do it. And sometimes if you make really, really long strands, or 2 or 3, I saw one nice way to, if you do just 2 really long strands and twist them together and then bring the edges together, you get a nice circular loaf too that way. I saw one pretty easy circle.
David?
Matt, yes.
Yes.
I missed how you prepared your baking sheet.
I just use parchment paper. Parchment paper, and that's it. I don't do anything to the parchment paper. I just use parchment paper.
And they're both on the same sheet?
Yeah, mine are both in the same sheet, and they'll rise in the oven, but it's a pretty wide sheet, so it's not gonna be an issue for them on this sheet. If I had done 3, I would separate them into multiple sheets just to give them some more room.
I was gonna say mine are huge. There's no way both of I took my dough and I divided it into half and then half again, and they're both taking up the whole cookie sheet. So,
Depending on the size of your cookie sheet, that's not surprising. Different cookie trays will
but you
do.
I used oil too, or I took a butter thing and just used the outside of a butter piece of butter, a stick of butter, and use that to wipe down the cookie sheet.
So that works. Yeah, if you don't have parchment paper, you want to make sure to grease the tray or your tin foil. Make sure spray it. Cooking spray will help to make sure that the loaf doesn't stick when it's done. Sandy, thank you. I saw your comment in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. We're so glad all of you have been here today. Sherry, I did wrap those little pieces of dough, my challah that I separated. I wrapped them in tin foil and I put them in the oven. They will cook up. They're sort of the offering, right? If we think back to the sacrificial worship of our ancestors thousands of years ago, in total another time and place. We don't have sacrifice anymore today. This is actually in some ways the very closest thing we have, which is that we sort of burn up a little piece of the dough and let that be the offering, right? The sacrificial, the sentimental or symbolic sacrifice of our dough. So yes, I wrapped them. Oogie's there too. Oh, there's there. What's up, Ooga? What's wrong? Hi.
I have an Oogie spotting.
That's right.
I think I can get them on one. I think I'm gonna get. I have one gigantic tray. I think I'm gonna be able to get them on this way.
That's how mine are. So yes, mine are here. Mine are
yes.
That way.
Yeah. So obviously we're not staying on until they come out of the oven.
We are not staying on until they come out of the oven, no.
So what's the steps after they come out?
After they come out.
Maybe there aren't any steps. I don't know.
The only step I would say after they come out is that you want to make sure to let them cool for 5 minutes before you touch them, and then transfer them to a wire cooling rack if you have it.
So 5 minutes on the tray and then onto a cooling rack.
That's what I would do. Yep. And if you made from our recipe 2 large loaves, then it should take at 350 about 37 minutes or so. Gorgeous, Carol. Look at that. Gorgeous.
And good luck waiting until Shabbat to dive into your challah.
And so what I would encourage you to do, though, no matter what size loaves you have, is check them early and check if you have an oven light, especially. Don't open the oven, but try to take a look at them early and often. My oven here can be finicky, which is why I say that, right? If your oven is tried and true, really steady, it holds temperature really well, you're probably fine maybe not checking it as frequently. I tend to check it very, very frequently because my oven is not so trustworthy. But again, before I take them out, I'm looking for nice dark brown color. In the oven, they may split apart a little bit, but I'm looking for, if they have split apart a little bit, I'm looking for the parts that are split to also be starting to brown, even though they might be lighter than the parts that got the egg wash. And that's about it. Rabbi Ravachal, is there anything you look for when you to try and double check that your chalot are finished?
Once it starts smelling like challah in my apartment, I like to wait another like 2 to 3 minutes to make sure that they are really, really golden brown. But besides that, good luck waiting until tomorrow to eat them.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. You don't, if you're gonna freeze them for next, we'll freeze one for next week or cut one in half and freeze that for next week, however you want to do it. Make sure it's cooled all the way before you freeze. In my experience, you know, once these come out for me tonight, I'm probably not going to freeze them before tomorrow night. They'll be fine for till dinner tomorrow night. But if I decided to freeze them even tonight for the day tomorrow, I would take them out of the oven, rather of the freezer, couple hours before I want to eat them. And if you're reheating a challah from frozen, just be careful not to leave it in too long. Is my suggestion there.
We also foil wrap them, like saran wrap it and then foil wrap it. And then I often put it into a bag, and that way it prevents as much as you can freezer burn. And if you are one of those types of people that likes to post your food on social media, be sure to tag us at Kol Ami WeHo.
And I would also love if you are on Instagram. I have a new cooking Instagram, which is Cooking with Rabbi Max. You're welcome to follow me and also tag me in that for the chalot, if you want to. And if not, that's okay too. So here we are. Can we go to Challah Cam one more moment? Challah Cam. I've just egg washed these once more. I'm gonna now give this one its everything bagel seasoning. My husband says, "Oh, that stuff's good." He loves that. That one's finished. This one is not from Trader Joe's. This one is from Aldi. Well, yeah, Trader, same thing. It's Aldi. But they sell this at a lot of grocery stores these days. It's very popular, I think. Get that a little bit more. And that edge.
I've also been told you can find it either at Costco or at Smart and Final in like jumbo size.
Oh, that, yeah. Well, I'm sure that's true. All right, so my chalot here. One more. Again, I put them the short way across the tray, and they are not going to touch in the oven. They're still going to rise a bit in the oven, of course, but they are ready to go. And nice. Who's showing me those? David. David, that's beautiful. Way to go.
Thank you.
Cooking with Rabbi Max is only on Instagram, but there is a Kol Ami West Hollywood Facebook page that
yes, the congregation has a Facebook page. You're welcome to follow us. Please do. My cooking channel is only Instagram. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever even posted any of the photos there to my profile. I should do that. But let's move that. And yeah, if we're, we'll stick around now for another 5-10 minutes if there are questions or comments, questions about the text and the learning, of course, too, or questions about the recipe. I'm happy to stick around. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. This is so much, Carol, this is a lot of fun cooking with other people. And I agree with you. It's one of those things that I would say, oh, that's David, those are gorgeous. I hope they're going to be so tasty for you. One of the things for me after singing with other people that I've missed is cooking and being in the kitchen together and eating together, literally breaking bread, right? I know that it's something that so many of us miss. And the idea for this kind of afternoon and evening came to me actually from my family back on the East Coast. Over closer to Hanukkah, we spent a couple days doing some family recipes in the kitchen together, and I thought that this would be fun to do together as a congregational community too. And so I I'm so glad that you've all been here this afternoon. It's been a treat to see you, not once even, but twice. So thanks for being here.
Thank you both, Rabbi Max and Rabbi Alon. I really enjoyed it, even though I didn't bake today.
That's okay. We're probably gonna get the video up to YouTube. Carol, look at that! Wow.
What?
Beautiful.
Yes.
Way to
That's
go.
the plain one. But it kind of it flattened after I put the egg mixture on top.
Well, I hope everyone's challah are delicious. And the best thing is, you know what?
What am I supposed to do with these again?
Wrap them in foil and throw them in the oven too.
On the tray?
Not on the tray. I put mine on the baking sheet, the rack beneath where the sheet is. You also can throw them away, right? They're a symbolic sacrifice. They're a symbolic letting go. So if you prefer to just throw them away, you can just throw them away. That some people do that too. Traditionally, it would be burnt.
And if you enjoyed cooking or watching Rabbi Max cook on April 13th at 5:30 p.m., Chef Jake Cohen is virtually coming to Kol Ami, and his book, I think it's called Jewish. Is that what it's called?
His cookbook is called Jewish, and you can actually hold on a second here. Give me one moment. I'll put a link here in our chat. You can even order a copy of the book if you haven't already done so. You can order a copy of the book that both supports the chef and supports Kol Ami by ordering it through through the congregation. I'll put the link here. If you'd like that copy of that cookbook and you don't have one, you can support Kol Ami and support the chef by ordering a copy there. And thank you, Adrian. Yeah, it's literally brand new. If you haven't encountered Chef Jake Cohen yet, he's a great up and coming Jewish chef based in New York, and yeah, we're lucky to be hosting him in just over a month.
Our challahs are supposed to be rising on the tray now for another 10, 20 minutes.
Yeah, if they've been sitting on the tray already for 5-10 minutes, you can give it another 5-10 and then put them in. And
the bake time is about 35 to 40 minutes.
That's right.
When it smells like challah. I heard
it might smell like challah sooner than that. It
smells like challah now.
There you go. So yeah, you have to, yeah.
Smells like challah plus golden brown.
Who said that?
Ilana.
You're right.
Megan. Oh, you're saying good night. Megan was saying good night. Okay.
Max, next time I want to do one with raisins. I had my raisins out, but I forgot to ask you. I was going to put it in the braided part, but then you said earlier no.
Yeah, usually with mixing in raisins or
because I thought cinnamon raisin would be good.
Yeah, my understanding is when you do raisin, you want to knead it in from the beginning and let it rise with the raisins. Anytime you're enriching, my understanding is basically anytime you're enriching a dough with fruit like that, with few exceptions, it's better to knead it in from the start. So that would mean that you'd want to split into your loaves before the rise, have two bowls ready to let the halves rise in, and so on. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks for being with us. Take care. Thank you, Jing. It was great to see you. Great to have you.
Enjoy making dinner, Ashley.
That's right. Enjoy. Thank you, Emma. Good to see you too. Thanks for being here. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Hope to see you for Shabbat tomorrow.
Yes,
Thank you,
Shabbat.
thank you, thank you, thank
you,
you.
David.